Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another special edition of Hops Geek News, where today we have a very special guest with us, and we'll get to him in just a moment. But as always, find us searching Hops News on all your podcasting platforms: Podchaser, Apple, Spotify, things of that nature. Instagram's Hops Geek News, Twitter Geek Hops. I am one of your two co-hosts, Mash, and alongside me is the Hoppy Mommy. What's happening? What art thou drinking on this tonight? It's Tuesday.
Thou art drinking a very special beer tonight. It is one home brewed by not yours truly, by you truly, by Mash.
It
So I
is.
got this in the mail. I did bust out my Halloween wine glass because we are talking a murder mystery detective comic book
Ooh,
tonight. So
we are.
I'll post a picture of it. It's got a little, fake blood all on it. I used this for many a Dexter episode in the past, so it seemed
Oh
appropriate.
gosh.
And Sopranos.
It has a, by
But
the way, that beer, it's called a Heroic Tales.
it's actually quite fantastic. I am very impressed. It might be because my last homebrew was utter garbage, but I mean, this is great. It poured great head. It looks beautiful. It tastes like beer. I mean, what else do you want from a homebrew? It's actually really good. I am impressed, Matt. And it
Did
made the
it.
trip from Idaho to Florida. So
It did. It did. I got a
kudos to
future in the
you.
biz. I don't know if there's any breweries out there who just, you need up and coming starter. What's up? That was the first one ever made. So, future in the biz,
Yep.
kid. I'm not drinking a homebrew. I have one left. The wife says I can't brew anymore until I finish that one. So I guess I should have finished that. But I chose from Sideward Brewing that you happen to have been at today. It's called Probably
Yep.
Nobody. I'll show it to the cam here. A little spooky horror theme. Because again, we're talking some really exciting things today. It's an imperial stout with coconut, cocoa nibs, vanilla, and almonds. So that's what I have. But
Yeah,
enough
that
about
beer's
us.
fantastic.
We have a very special guest tonight here to talk about his comic book that by the time this comes out, it's out 2 days ago. So everywhere you can get comic books, we'll talk a little bit more here. But Frank, how are you doing? How are you tonight? Thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thank you for having me on. This should be fun. And Lauren, I'm disappointed. I wanted to hear some crazy story about how you got your glass drenched in blood. About
Oh
somebody
my God, you're
tipped
totally
you off
right.
in line and decided to just ooze out their blood along the edge of the glass. But if it's fake, I guess that's okay
Well, that's what I tell people. It's fake. I'll give you the real story when we're off air.
too.
Yeah,
It
so
was self defense. That's all I'll say.
we have Frank Martin, who is a published author, and also he has a comic book called The Last Homicide that is out now. Here to talk to us about that. However, before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the things that you have written because you're a horror writer, and I love horror books.
I'm a little bit of an everything writer, but
Yeah,
horror definitely kind of came easier to me. So I guess as far as my published works go, that's kind of where I started. As when it comes to novels, I was a big blockbuster kid, so I would just go down the rack of the horror section. It was either horror or sci-fi. There seems like there
oh
is
yeah,
no other section that you could put stuff in. So yeah, I would go down, just rent one movie after another. It didn't matter what it was because I just needed to check them all off the list. And so I've always been in the horror mindset, and it's a natural genre for me.
yeah. Do kids even know what Blockbuster is anymore? Because I can tell you that many of Friday nights were spent getting Chinese food, and then I go next door and, like you said, you just go down the wall of just. It was so big to 9, 10-year-old me. You're just looking up at this wall of movies of awesomeness, and you just don't
Yeah,
get that anymore.
it was weird. They had like the new releases, and of course they had the new releases as in like the blockbuster movies that we saw in theaters. But then they had so many obscure movies. They were like
Yeah.
new movies. They're new, but you've never heard of them before, and you don't really see that even with all the streaming services. It seems like you got to go out of your way to find something
Right.
that's new that you never heard
No.
of
Yeah.
with unknown.
You have to get recommendations. It's all word of mouth now.
Yeah.
But I mean, my oldest is 17, so she's actually been in a blockbuster. But I probably, if I asked my 8-year-old, I don't think she would know.
No. Like you
But there's a
just.
movie on Netflix right now called The Last Blockbuster. There is one left. I think it's in Bend, Oregon.
It is. It
So
is. I've been trying to go out that way because it's like the mecca of craft beer as well.
Well, I hear all the time that I haven't seen that documentary. I want to see it, but I hear all the time that there's one in Alaska. Was that, I guess, did that close down?
Oh.
They always called that one the last because the internet was
I
so
don't know.
spotty out there that stuff like Netflix and other streaming services weren't available all the time. So this one blockbuster was always in business. I don't know if that's
I don't either.
different
I
than,
guess we'll
I don't
find
know.
out.
Maybe there's maybe there's two left. But
Well, I
my kids
think
only know about
It's the second to last.
my kids only know about Blockbuster because there's a Walgreens there now. So every time I go to that Walgreens, I have to remind them that it used to be a Blockbuster that I went
they're
to.
like, "Why is Dad
Nice.
rolling tears in the car right now?" And you're like, "You guys just don't understand what this meant to me and what it was."
It was
Or in
such a
Captain Marvel.
culture. It was such a there is in Captain Marvel too, but it was such a culture of like grabbing a movie, grabbing those buckets of popcorn that they had like stuffed in the
Yeah.
bottom, and then they
And
had
the
the candy, they had the
candy.
deals, and then you always timed it exactly right where you could watch the movie and you return it before the late fee started, and then get the next movie. So it was, I don't know, it was a whole rental culture was a whole new thing that
it was an
just gone.
experience, you know, like it was an event and it was an experience. And you don't, what am I scroll Netflix, I scroll, you know, Disney Plus for how many hours now to find a movie, and it just doesn't feel the same because you're on your couch and you're like, what do you want to watch? I don't know. You don't feel like you have to make a choice. Whereas when you're at the movie store, you're like, I'm leaving here with something. I don't care what it is.
Right. And
Yeah,
at least you're burning calories too, walking up and down the
Yeah.
aisles rather than sitting on your couch.
It's the same thing as kind of going to the comic book shop because yeah, you can have your iPad and just kind of click stuff and get it, but there's something about just going up and down the aisle and scanning the titles and picking stuff
Or
out
even-
that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even asking for recommendations. Like I've, you know, when I go to the comic book store, I'll be like, hey, you know, like they know what to give me. They know what to suggest. They know what I like. And so, yeah, it's the same kind
You
of
also,
thing.
yeah, you used to build that repertoire with like your Blockbuster crew that they could just give you the recommendations. And you definitely, Netflix doesn't know me. Like clearly they don't know me with some of the recommendations
I know
they
their
give me.
suggestions are always garbage, and then your kid goes in there and watches Umi Zoomy on your account, and then it's all messed up.
Yeah, or you know, you get my kids are watching on Disney Plus Descendants or like this other zombie movie, and it's just this throws off the whole algorithm. Okay, I want to watch Mighty Ducks, not Descendants. Okay,
We have all separate Netflix profiles, and when I go to my profile, and it's like, do you want to continue watching Bridgerton? I'm like, Sarah, you need to
No.
stop watching
like
my
no,
profile.
I do not. I don't like.
I never
Anyway.
started Bridgerton. I don't need to finish it.
What is a Bridgerton? I have no idea.
I don't know, but people
honestly
keep
don't.
talking
My wife
about it.
watched
I don't either.
My wife
I think my
watched it. I
daughter
don't.
watched it.
She's
something
in my
about
wife introduced me to a whole new genre of like historical romance. I'm like, how many shows are there? Maybe 2. There's like 70 different historical romance that I would have never
like
otherwise
they're all
heard.
the same thing, but different characters.
Well, I've heard it's historical, but it's current.
I
I don't know
Couldn't
what that
tell
means.
you. I'll ask. I'm going to ask my wife, and I'll get back to you all on that one because I have
Okay,
no
I'll
idea.
ask my daughter. You ask
But,
your wife, and we'll reconvene.
We didn't come here for Blockbuster or Netflix, though.
No,
We came here
we didn't.
to discuss your comic book. So before we get into that, what are some things that you've written, and then also like what got you, like how did you start writing, and how did you find that passion?
So on the comic book front, some of my recent stuff is I'm a big Kickstarter guy. So Last Homicide is going to be exclusive Kickstarter for the time being. My last 2 campaigns was last year, last October, I launched a book called The Macabre Motel, which was a one-shot Twilight Zone inspired horror book. That's kind of like a guy stops at a motel full with a bunch of weird people, and he goes and they don't let him leave. It's kind of a weird book. January, I launched a sci-fi adventure book called the Polar Paradox, which is kind of like a deep sea divers in Antarctica are on like a rescue mission. So that's a 2-parter. The second part is going to be launching after The Last Homicide in a couple months. And yeah, I've always enjoyed just writing in general. You know, when you're in middle school, or I should say elementary school, teachers assign like a creative writing project, write a 2-page story, and all the kids write their story and they have a good time doing it. And then the teacher, okay, now let's go on to the next lesson. And I'm like, no, but I want to do another one, you know? So I would just do it on my own after that. I just enjoyed it and I just kept on writing, and then moved into fan fiction because that's where all kids kind of gravitate towards. They love these characters. They want to write their own stories for them. And then I moved into my own original works, and this is all prose. Like I didn't write any comics. But at some point in time, I started reading comics, and it wasn't until I don't know, I was about college age that I figured I love writing stories and I like reading comics. Let me just try writing a comic. And it's a steep learning curve. It's the technical side of it is way different than writing prose. and I had a couple crash and burns because whenever somebody wants to dive into writing comics, they're always so naive about the process and what's involved and how to get it done. Yeah.
So that's I'm pointing to myself because I have a comic book idea I want to write, but I've never written a comic book, so I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like, let me find somebody to hook up with. So this is interesting to know that there is a lot more to it because a lot of people don't think they're
Yeah.
like, oh, you just got to kind of write some panels and things, but there is a lot more to it.
There's so everybody usually makes the big mistake of I'm going to go right out of the gate for my magnum opus. And comic books nowadays, I mean, back in the day, they were all like one issue. For the first Spider-Man had like when Amazing Spider-Man first started, it was one issue, and they had two stories in that one issue. And nowadays, in order for them to finish one story, it's like 6 issues long. They span an entire arc. So when people start writing comics now, they think if I want to write a story, I need it to be 6 issues long, or 4 or 5 or something. And that's a terrible way to learn, is to spread it out over that period of time. So I wrote 6 issues. I'm like, let's make this. And I found an artist, and we got halfway through the first issue, and the project just fell apart. So I put that in the shelf, and then I went back to basics. I started writing shorts, and I gradually built up to writing one shots and 2-parters and 3-parters. So yeah, I kind of went backwards to kind of start from the beginning to really get my the
Sometimes you got
get
to
my
start
experience in.
that, you got to start that way because you got to learn the things that don't work to figure out what does work sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's easy to do. It's very difficult to do well. Anybody could kind of just describe what to write in a panel, but comic book writing is all about resource management. You got X amount of pages, you got Y amount of panels on those pages, and you need to tell a story. So you can either have a fight scene last 6 pages, or you could have a fight scene last 1 page, and you have to decide which one is right for this particular story. And you got to time page turns to keep the reader interested. You want to end on a little bit of a cliffhanger if you got a series, because you want to make sure it's on the right story beats. So there's a lot of planning involved.
Yeah. And so for doing comics, do you guys kind of like, it's kind of like a movie, right? Do you do storyboards, things of that nature, kind of planning out your way to get to these points, or how does that kind of work for you guys?
So the way I work is I typically write a synopsis, just basically a play-by-play event of whatever the issue is or particular story, and then I break that down into a page breakdown where basically it would be the exact same synopsis. I'll just break it out line by line as far as what's going to happen on every page, and then I use that as essentially an outline for a script. And I'm an absolute terrible artist, so I don't. Some writers will storyboard out the comic itself for their artist, because they could kind of sort of draw, but I have no skill whatsoever doing that. So I kind of skip that process, and very rarely do I actually draw something on a page. Only if it's like a crazy page layout and it's super hard, difficult to describe, and I might as well just draw. Or no, one thing I do definitely do is I take a lot of pictures of myself in various poses. My wife would be my photographer. Like if I need a certain expression and I can't find a reference online of someone taking this expression, you'll find a bunch of random pictures of me just kind of like making weird faces. Oh,
There's like a whole
Love to see
collection on
your
your
camera
computer.
roll.
It's just like
Yeah.
you in various poses that somebody like happens to stumble upon one day.
what the hell is going on
Like,
here?
what is
Like,
this? This
this
is
guy
not
wants
what
to
I
be
was
an
looking for.
Instagram model.
You got to do what you got to do, man. Especially when you want things to
Yeah.
look a particular way.
Especially because only you kind of have that in your mind, right? Like you know what you're trying to go for, and sometimes it's easier to do those poses. It's easier to kind of like play it out versus say it because a lot of people just don't get it when you're saying it.
Right. And
I'm a
only you
visual
have it
learner,
in your
anyways.
your head. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I mean, you look at Disney, they're going to draw Lion King. They brought an actual lion, so it's good to have an actual frame of reference even
yep.
when you're changing it. So, no, that makes perfect sense. And with anything art, like you say you're not an artist, but writing is an art, and
Oh
everything
yeah,
in art takes so much longer than people realize it does, and so much
a lot of work
sweat,
as well. Yeah.
tears, yeah.
And that's one of the main things that I've learned, difference between writing prose and writing comics, is that with comics it's a team. It's not just your art. In a sense, I'm crafting the story, but I'm using the artist as a filter for me to bring that comic to life to the reader. Whereas when I'm
Mhm.
writing prose, I have a direct shot to the reader, so it's entirely my creation.
Yeah.
I have to share a little bit of the spotlight when I'm writing comics. I mean, I can have an idea of how it's going to look in my head, but I'm going to take the back seat when it comes to visual storytelling because I've worked with a whole bunch of artists who really know what they're doing. The way to make a reader's eye go across the page the way you want it to. That's just, I mean,
Right.
I could plan it out, but when it comes to actual creation, it's one skill that I'm not that good at. So I would definitely it, turn to them and take their advice as far as what it's going to look like, regardless of what I want, because you got to try.
Mhm.
Why else would you work with an artist unless you're going to trust them?
No,
Right. And
for
that's
sure.
one of the beauties of comics is like the picture tells almost as much as the story as the words do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So how do you find your artist for each? Do you just kind of like put something out there each time, or how do you pick kind of like who you want to work with every time?
So in the beginning, when I was first looking for artists, I would post online, basically the type of project that I had, and I would ask people to submit samples if they were interested. And I quickly learned that that's not the best way to do things because there's so many artists out there looking for work that you'll be like, I'm looking for samples of artists that love doing horror, and you'll get a bunch of people that saying, I'm a great cartoonist. You're looking to work with me? Like that's not what I asked for. So
No, that's not at all it.
I
you'll
don't
get
want Calvin and Hobbes.
you'll get completely swamped with people that are just throwing out resumes just looking to get work. So the best way to do it is to kind of stalk groups on Facebook or other social media and wait for people to make those posts and then go and look for samples that you're looking for
Oh,
that kind of mix and
Okay.
match. And also I've been doing this for a couple of years now that I kind of know so many artists just through
yeah.
sending out random friend requests or just chatting in various places that when I'm writing something and I need to look for an artist, I'll immediately have somebody in mind. Even it might not work out. It might be fun. I might have to look for somebody else. But yeah, I have a whole mess of artists in my mental Rolodex to kind of choose from at this point.
Oh, that makes sense for sure. So kind of where do you draw the inspiration then from? Like each one's kind of a different story. Like the last homicide is kind of that callback, right? To your classic detective film noirs almost. It's kind of how I felt. You got
Hmm.
the detective who's young and aspiring, and then you have the detective who they're throwing a retirement party for.
He's too old for
Yeah,
this.
like it's my last day. This is my last job, kid, kind of deal.
Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a whole bunch of various tropes and mash them together to kind of create my own version of this story because I've always loved this genre, but in today's day and age, you don't really see a whole lot of true detective pulp stories like this.
Oh yeah.
They're always mashed with something else. I took as you said, the retiring detective and the new up and comer. I mean, that's a little bit of a homage to Seven. We had Morgan Freeman
Mm.
and Brad Pitt.
Fantastic
What's in
movie.
the box?
Yeah, that's a detective noir film, but it's definitely meshed together with psychological horror. And
Hmm.
one of my favorite movies is Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is kind of the same thing, but it's thrown together with comedy and
That's a
cartoons. So it's
perfect movie.
yeah, I could watch that a million times. So
Underrated, I think. It's a classic.
Yes,
well,
absolutely.
so there's so many of these kind of genre mashups at this point where we're taking tropes but we're taking them in new directions of either fantasy or horror, something like Dark City that's kind of neo-noir. We're playing around and we're experimenting. I wanted to extract that and basically bring it back to its roots and do it just a straight up hard-boiled detective story, which is kind of what we got.
Yeah.
But I love that you mashed it up. Like once it got to the mafia, I've always been big into that stuff. I was like, oh, that adds a whole new element to it. Because then you have the cops, and it's why they're so jaded because they're dealing with the mafia. But then it's so weird because when you're watching those, detective cop things, like you're rooting for the cops, and you want these guys to succeed because you love them. But whenever there's something mafia, you always end up rooting for the bad guys in that. Even what was the movie with Johnny Depp, Donnie Brasco? It's like he was an undercover guy who became a wise guy, and you were still rooting for him as the wise guy. You didn't want him to turn in his friends. So
Yeah.
you have these two genres that you kind of root for the that person even when they're breaking bad, so to speak. So I especially love. I don't know how many spoilers you want to give, but I felt like once you open up the whole mafia thing, it just was like, there's so much potential to go so many different ways and so many different things, and I loved that.
Yeah, I'm a huge mafioso guy. I love how did I just draw a blank on this? Oh, Carlito's Way is another one.
Okay,
Oh
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Where you're rooting for Al Pacino so much, but he's a gangster. You know, he wants to get out, and of course, Goodfellas, Casino, and then you got
Classic, yes.
stuff like Sopranos. It we love to watch that stuff. I mean, but these are bad guys, but at the same time, it's such a
Are they
alluring kind of
bad
world.
Hmm.
guys?
It's a very attractive world that they're in, regardless of how ugly and dirty and
It is.
just
Yeah.
downright not good that it's
But you
that's
see the
been.
good guys become jaded because the bad guys are so jaded, and it's just they kind of feed
It's like
off
an
of each other.
Yeah, it's these. I really channeled my inner kind of old school golden age Hollywood screenwriter with this book, because I had so much dialogue and banter going back and forth between the two
Hmm.
partner detectives, and then the detectives going back with the mob bosses. So it was a lot of fun, just kind of just really
yeah.
being stereotypical and playing off the tropes, and really just have the back and forth banter and the dialogue, because mafia bosses are, they don't reach that level of the organization without choosing their words very carefully. You know, they have to be very manipulative, they have to be very articulate. So
Hmm.
they're a lot of fun to write.
For sure. And so obviously we're talking The Last Homicide, which is a comic book that came out 2 days ago when you're listening to this. Um, Written by our friend right here, Frank Martin, illustrated. And if I get any of these wrong, just feel free to interject and be like, no, actually it's how you pronounce this or not. Illustrated by Pietro Vaughn, colored by Eugene Bedivu. Oh my gosh.
Batibu?
You
Betivu.
got it.
All right. Lettered by Tobin Ratchcoat and
Rassicot.
Rassicot. See, there was going to be one. There's going to
It's
be one.
okay.
It
Pin
was
up.
inevitable. These
It
are tricky
was.
names.
They
You
are.
have the
Those are
easiest
really
name in the bunch,
pin up
other than the
by
variant cover.
Stephen Panella, and then variant cover is Luke Cooper. And like I said, it's coming out. And you mentioned it's all going to be Kickstarters and stuff like that. So when for sure get us the Kickstarter link, and we will push the crap out of this, because I can
We'll
tell you right off
blast
the
it.
bat,
Yeah.
Lauren and I were reading this comic, and there's so much to love about it. You noticed the artwork right away. The artwork was fantastic, and then just the way you were kind of writing that witty banter between the cops, and then you go to the mafia bosses, and they're kind of talking there, and you you want to kind of believe that, yeah, they had nothing to do with what went down, but at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, of
They're
course they're gonna
pathological
lie,
liars.
just like. She says, she's like, well, of course, you think he's going to confess to murder? And you're like, exactly.
Who
Well,
confesses to murder? But no, I
uh,
instantly started reading it in like a Dick Tracy Watchmen kind of tone. Like
Yeah.
as soon as I saw the artwork, that's how I started reading it in my head.
I had one line in there that was a lot of fun when he asked one of the mob bosses. He says, "So do you have any did you have any involvement in the murder?" And he's like, "I think I would always answer no to that question." Like, it
It's
was
Right.
an honest answer.
he's he's like and then they were like, oh, can we look around? He goes, no. And, well, do you have something to hide? And he's like, I have a plenty to hide from you. What do you mean, just not
But
this
not this
murder?
murder, yeah.
And it's just it's smart, because it's like, well, obviously, because you can kind of picture, and I make up the own voices in my head, so you have that very classic mob boss tone in your head.
Mhm.
And then I also picture the lady mob boss. I picture her voice kind of in the Italian, like in John Wick. What was it, 2 or 3? It was 2, when he's in Italy and he kills the one lady mob boss. That's kind of like the voice I had
Wait,
for her
John
in my
Wick kills
head.
somebody?
I know, shocking, shocking.
I've actually never seen any of the John Wick movies. They're on
Oh,
my to-do list. You know,
oh,
it's gotten to the point where there's so many of them, and they're coming out with another one. I have to like have a John Wick binge day. So I'm
I
just kind
Yeah.
of now I need
promise
to.
you will not be disappointed. Like,
I've only seen the first one, and 2 and 3 are on my
oh
to-do
my
list.
God,
Yeah,
guys,
I
what are
know,
we
I know.
doing?
Again, I've also been
It
yelled at because I
is
haven't seen Lord of the Rings. I watched the first
okay.
one recently. So, yeah. He
No,
gets angry at a lot
no,
of
no
things.
kidding. Like, yes, Lord of the Rings, I'll deal with you later. However,
You've already dealt with me. I already watched the
John
first one
Wick,
2 weeks
John Wick
ago.
is fantastic, and I think if you're, like you're kind of talking about the
Oh, the first one's
callbacks,
good. Yeah.
you're kind of rooting for everybody in those movies, just because they're he's a hitman, and there's a lot to love, and there's a lot going of intertwined stories. But anyways, Kitty Valerio is the mob boss whose voice I was picturing to be like some Italian accent and things of that nature. And it was actually her son who was found murdered in his own home. And that's kind of where the story
It
picks
starts
up.
off, yeah.
Yeah,
And I
Yes.
I
gotta say,
have.
I do love that you did a female mob boss because even when I saw Kitty, I thought it was a dude. So I love that. Go ahead. I'm
I
sorry.
know. I was. Yeah, I should probably give the elevator pitch for the book. I don't think I. We just started talking about
You're
it.
right. You're
Yeah,
that
go
is
for it.
my
Yeah,
apologies. I just got caught up in
I
the
just
moment.
realized you started talking about the dead son. I'm like, we haven't really brought up what the book is about yet.
You're right.
It's about
So
someone's dead son.
yeah, so and I have to point out that it's a grown up son. It's not like I killed some kid at the beginning of the book.
Oh God, that is good to put
That
out
is
there. I
very
didn't
true
think
because
of
we don't
that.
need
There
people
are
being
no
like, you
dead
killed
children
a
in this book.
child? Look, he's like 25. All right. Come on. He's not a
Right,
child.
you lose a
So
lot of the audience when you do that. He's
the
a millennial.
the premise of the book is a mob boss's son is murdered, and there's these two mob bosses in this very corrupt city, and these detectives had to figure out who killed the son before the mob bosses start a war. And the lead detective is about to retire, so this is his last homicide, his last case, and he has to solve it. Otherwise, the city's going to tear itself apart before he retires. So that's kind of the
Yeah,
premise.
We're gonna have
absolutely.
a
The
Valentine's Day
classic,
massacre.
yeah, the classic, mob versus mob. They're taking each other out.
They don't want to
And
go to the mattresses.
so it's a fictional city. You said that you were from New York. Did you kind of have New York in mind when you were writing this, or was it just kind of all these different mob cities kind of blended together?
You know what? I like when I write, I like to make things timeless. And I think the best way to do that is to number one, never really include any pop culture references. It's not like
Oh yeah.
my characters never go eat at McDonald's, or they don't. So I kind of remove specific names from my stories. And I kind of did this the city as well. I didn't want to put it in one specific city. I kind of want it to be a timeless city, kind of everyman dirty city, like we see what's the Dick Tracy city that they're in all the time. I forget what it's called.
Oh man, I can't remember the name. I'll look it up in the meantime.
But yeah, I like kind of doing that, setting a fictional city, but at the same time, a lot of the visuals you can see references to New York, Chicago. There's some Miami in there too.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of so it really pulls on that noir kind of pulp feel to it when we do location shots and we mix around the different architectures and the different locales.
It
Right,
takes
and you just
place in
named like all this.
California. That's where Dick
No,
Tracy
maybe
is.
I was wrong.
California. It's a city resembling Chicago. So
Yeah, I was gonna
although
say it's.
when you
Yeah.
do think kind of these movies, you think big city though, like Chicago, New York. They kind of are like one and the same in your head. You can take tones from every single one.
Also, it helps to when you set these fictional cities, it helps to set the stage for a truly corrupt city, because in no city is so corrupt that the police are just going to really bend to the whim of every single mob boss that's there,
Oh yeah.
so by setting it in a fictional setting, it allows you to get a little bit of it allows you to bend realism a little bit
Mhm.
to that kind of feel to it, to that atmosphere that these cops really aren't in charge at
Yeah.
all.
So you've mentioned kind of the play on you have the old cop kind of going back to like Seven, things of that nature. Now for the mob bosses, we have Don Franco and we have Kitty Valerio. Did you have kind of some inspirations for them in mind, or just kind of your traditional mob bosses from each end of the spectrum?
I think I played off a whole lot of different stereotypical mob boss things. One of my favorite sequences in the book is they go see Don Franco at a Italian restaurant.
I
And
love
he-
that too. Yeah.
and he's
As
eating a bowl of pasta, and the way we played it off is when he's talking to the cops, we progressively get closer and closer to him eating this big bowl of spaghetti. So it's like you get this grimy kind of disgusting feel to it as he's chewing it up. So yeah, I played off of a lot of tropes and stereotypes, and I like doing that, especially when you have an original story, because it feels familiar but new at the same time.
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it gave me a major Sopranos vibe because they're always shoveling their faces full of
Yeah,
pasta.
he's eating
Yeah.
the pasta there. He's twirling his fork and he's basically like telling them off at the end. Now, very classic kind of mob boss there. That always takes place in a restaurant of some or
Well, they're
food,
not little dudes. I mean, they're all pretty big, pretty big dudes. They eat a lot of carbs. And I like that his name was Don too. You just cut straight to the chase. He's a Don. His name's Don. He's a Don.
And so they throw the surprise retirement party. Lauren pointed this out. There could be a death foreshadowed. I know you're not going to spoil it, nor should you, because I'm already hooked and I want to read more. But did you kind of have like not have that in mind, but you're planting some seeds, possibly leaving it up to the reader? I know.
Because
So
it's his
mystery is a very difficult genre to write because you want the mystery to tie into the story. You know, you can't just have some killer be some random guy walking down the street. Oh, it's you. We never met this person before, but you did it. So it all has
Surprise.
to make sense.
it'd be a hell of a surprise.
Yeah, so you want to introduce things. You want the reader to circle back around for it to make sense, for it to really to close the gap from the part one to part two. So yeah, I definitely drop things in there, either lines of dialogue or characters we meet, even if it's for a split second, that's going to play a role later on. So it has to tie together somewhat. It can't be just totally random. We're just going to introduce some character in part two at the very end. That's the killer. That, oh my god, they solved it, and everything.
It's over. There we go.
Yeah.
Be like,
Do you
okay.
ever like with something like this? Do you ever kind of go into it thinking one thing, and as you're writing, you're just kind of like, "Oh no, if we took it this direction, like we're gonna just bang a Yui here real quick because I think this sounds way better." Do you kind of ever have that with your writing, or do you always go in pretty pre-planned?
I'm pretty pre-planned. I'm definitely a plotter, so I need to know everything. I don't need to know everything, but I need to know what's going to
Big
happen at the end of the story
points.
before I start. I rarely
Okay.
have such a fork in the road when I'm writing that I'm like, it's going to be a completely different ending. That rarely happens to me. A
Yeah.
lot of times, if things change or shift, it's like specific details about a scene. You know, things that I want things to happen a certain way. It would just play out differently than I originally intended, but the end result is always the same. You know, I never
Got
really
you.
change a story so much that I want to go over here, but I wind up all the way over there. That
Yeah,
that
that makes
really never
sense.
happened to me
No,
See,
that
I
because
makes total sense. Yeah.
no, but I like that. Like when I see like this amazing twist and everything and things connect, I want to know like this was pre-planned and they were kind of fucking with us the whole time. It's kind of like I kind of want that for these long-term things. Like anybody who's watching Invincible right now and has read the comic, like you wonder like did Robert Kirkman have this in mind at the end? And so when you start writing that, you know how these characters are going to inevitably end up and like you're just getting from one and what happens in the middle you can kind of switch. It's basically what you're saying because I gotta say when I was getting to the end of this and I'm like okay I only have 2 pages left, I really don't want to only have 2 pages left because I know I'm not going to get everything I want in those 2 pages and I want to keep finding out what's going on and there's got to be more to this story. So
the big debate with writing, and this goes a lot. I would say more for prose than for comics, is the argument is plotters versus pantsers. People that like
Yeah.
myself that are plotters that have to know everything before we start writing, and pantsers kind of write by the seat of their pants. They really don't know.
oh
They
I'm
might.
like what the hell are pantsers, they pants people?
Yeah, that no, that's the that those are there's some writers that don't plan out anything. They kind of just they have vague ideas of where the story wants to go, but for the most part, they don't know how they're going to get there. So they write a
Yeah.
chapter and they don't know how that chapter is going to end. And I, for the life of me, cannot figure out how they do that.
Yeah, that blows my mind a little bit.
I need to know because sometimes when I'm writing uh, a novel and I'll get to 75% of the way through and I realize I can add a specific detail, I'm like, but I didn't mention that in the beginning. So I have to go back like 20 chapters earlier and insert a line to tie it all together because that's how anal I am with my
No,
outline.
that's really good. No, it makes perfect sense because I'm kind of that. I'm no professional writer by any means, but I'm the same way. Like, not the same way as you. I'm just that kind of person that I know the beginning and end of a story that I kind of want to tell, and then the middle stuff. I'm like, well, I guess I'll just get there as I get there when I'm just free writing or whatnot. And so
See, I
I
don't
don't know
write at
how it
all, but
works.
I want to know that the writer, everything was intentional. Like if I'm watching, Supernatural is a great example. That show was on for 15 years, and you want to know that like everything they did was intentional. And it's, I'm sure some writers are and some writers aren't, and it's probably a mixture of some because I don't write at all. But like, I just want to know that it all meant something.
It's very very tricky in with comics. It's really easy to tell when people weren't really paying that much attention to how they get from point A to point B, because pacing is so blatantly obvious in a comic. You know, you
Oh yeah.
can see when there's a lot of padding just to get the story to the end. And
Mhm.
some people pull it off well in television, some people don't, because television is one of those things you never know how many seasons you're going to get. So you
Right.
Oh
have
yeah.
an example, a good example is Breaking Bad. Like in the final season, they have Walter White buying that big machine gun and that he uses in the finale. But
Right.
I've heard the writers say they had no idea what he was going to do with it. It was a little bit of a kind of a red herring. They decided to have him buy it, and they'll figure it out what they're going to do later on. And then you got another,
Mm.
like, Lost drove me crazy because they never knew what they were going to do with all these mysteries that they were just kind of they lose
Well,
loose
Lost
threads.
had
They were
no idea.
that
J.J.
event.
I
Abrams,
heard
well, he
I
only did the
heard
first
Lost was
season, though.
only supposed to be a couple seasons and it was doing so well that ABC's like, no, 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 keep writing stuff. And
Do more of
that's
that. We
yeah.
like this.
There's some
Do
interview
more
with
of
the
those
two,
mysteries that you never wrap up.
Yeah.
right? But
The
then they kind
fans
of
will
jumped
forgive you for it.
they jumped the shark. It was the same guys who started Lost, started Once Upon a Time, and they kind of jumped the shark a little
Oh
bit with
God,
that as
yeah, yeah,
well.
yeah.
If you stuck around for the series finale, it wasn't terrible, but like they should have ended the show earlier. But it's like that's what ABC does apparently. They're just like, oh, it's making money, just keep going.
ABC
And now
goes too
Disney
short
owns
or
them and
long, and
Marvel.
Netflix goes too short. However, I want to give like a kind of a brief synopsis of the comic, just to kind of I know we're gonna talk spoilers,
I was
but
gonna say, do we
hopefully
want
this
to
thing,
talk spoilers?
yeah, because hopefully it encourages everyone to kind of check this out,
Oh yeah, because it
get it
doesn't
going,
conclude.
because
You left
it
us with a
doesn't, like, we're
cliffhanger.
on a big cliffhanger here. Like we
Yeah,
got
I feel
ourselves
like
a cliffhanger.
Sylvester
There needs to
Stallone
be
over
more
here.
of this. So it's obviously opens up in the apartment where you see the person is murdered. You get everyone kind of talking.
It is
Hey,
somebody's child, but not a child.
right. And the two detectives, they kind of leave because they don't want to contaminate the scene any further. They got what they need. They go back to the office where there's surprise retirement party. Hey, you're going to do great. Things of that
And
nature.
nobody's eating the cake.
Nobody will eat the
I
cake
love that
because
because
he's too
that's
fat.
so
His
real
wife wants him
life
to
too.
lose weight.
Oh, I'm
Yes.
diabetic. I'm on a diet. Nobody wants to eat the fucking cake.
You're just at the office and it's like, you can eat that piece. And well, no, I'm on this diet. And that things that I'm like, God, that's so relatable. That's just so relatable. I feel
It's
that
like
in my
my wife
soul.
called me fat or whatever it was. He's like,
But
oh, I don't know about that. Sucks for you.
kind of from there, the two detectives, they have their suspicions. So they first go visit Don Franco, and they're basically like, "Hey, why'd you kill him?" Because they find out that it's the son of another rival mob, and he tells them,
Like,
"I
how
didn't
does
do
this kid
this."
afford such a nice apartment?
Yeah, like,
Do you know who this kid
why
is?
did you murder him? And he's, look, I didn't do it. Whether we believe him or not, I personally, I don't think he did do it, and we'll get to why. We from there, they go and visit Kitty Valerio, kind of ask her, and she's really heartless. She's like, I have a lot of emotions. My son just died. Of course, this isn't a good day. And she's yelling at the rosebush gardeners, like, this isn't the right rose. My son just died, essentially. Come on.
No, it's not a rose. It's some other like
Fla-
pretty flower. And I
yes, you're
actually
right. You're
really
totally
like that.
right.
She goes, you think I want to look at these? I don't remember what they were. Pretty flowers. You probably do because you wrote it. But
You know what? I like. It's funny you say that because I'm like, I need a pretty flower. Can I Google flowers that don't belong at funerals? Like, you writers just Google the most random thing. I think it's a sunflower or something.
It's some sort of flower. I don't know. I just
yeah,
went
she's like, I
roses
don't want to look at these
automatically.
sunflowers when I'm
Yeah.
mourning. And
You
so
know what?
red roses, I mean, yeah, look at Batman, Kiss from a Rose on a Grave. Like red roses can be very romantic,
It's
but
my
they are
jam. See.
Yeah,
also
yeah, but fun facts:
mournful.
there are not that many flowers that are not appropriate for funerals. Apparently, you could buy any flower for a
Any
funeral.
flower works for a
Good to
funeral,
know.
apparently. The more you know. And so they go and visit her, and she wants to just bury her son. And then she wants to go and kind of start this mob war,
She
which is
feels
what the cops
vengeful.
don't want to happen, because then you have a war on their hands. And my man's just trying to retire. He just wants to quit. There's kind of that scene where they're talking in the car, and he's like, I just want to get out of here. I'm so jaded. We do all this, and for what? There's nothing. We don't get anything out of our job. It never ends. Essentially, he's
Right.
talking to the young guy like, you're so full of life, but you'll see that this is just a thankless job, essentially. And
I do want to say real quick though, I think a very important part was the son was not in the mafia, the son that
no,
was murdered,
yes,
because that is a, a big thing. And with mafias, Italian mafias, you usually don't fuck with family. You see, and other kind of, Mexican
Families off
cartels and whatnot. And
limits.
everything I know is pop culture. I don't actually have any
I,
actual knowledge.
I know
You're
this
not
from the
actually
years
into
I spent
mafia, trust me.
undercover trying to blow up the Gambino crime family. This is what I learned.
Right. This is what I learned from watching stuff. Yeah, you usually try not to fuck with Italian mafia family members. Other stuff, like you watch, if anybody who watches Ozark knows, they will easily fuck with family
Yeah.
members. And that's the Mexican cartel. But yeah, so this kid wasn't in connected at all. He was doing his own
Man's
thing. Of
just
course,
living
he
his
was still
life.
getting money from mommy. But so that was the more so reason, like, why would they kill this kid? Okay.
Yeah. And so they then decide to head back to the apartment because they've got no leads. We have no idea. Don says he didn't do it. Kitty's pretty sure he did it. We're about to
Say it
have
wasn't me.
we have a war coming pretty much. And so then they run into somebody that's in the apartment who knocks them down, and the young cop starts chasing after him. He is too slow as he jumps down the fire escape. Too slow. But then he finds a shell casing. Uh-oh. And it
Dun,
came from the
dun,
gun of a cop.
dun.
And so that's kind of where we leave off on this cliffhanger, that this gun casing came from the gun of a cop. And so now you're left wondering, is there a dirty cop? Did somebody steal a cop's gun? What's going on? Who's really behind this? And that's where we get left off. And I need
Was
more.
it
I need
The
more
Last
of this.
Detective?
I'm gonna write the sequel. Is gonna be the first Homicide.
Mm.
Ooh.
No,
So is it going to be like a prequel?
It's gonna be a Cain and Abel story. It's gonna be a retelling.
Oh, I saw that you do that. Like you had I don't know if you're kidding or not, because I saw on your website you have like Noah's Ark and stuff, like a modern day
Yes.
Noah's Ark.
My first comic series. So going back to the beginning of the discussion, when I wrote all those short stories, I compiled them together. It's basically an anthology series called Modern Testament, where I take
Yes.
characters or stories from biblical mythology and I retell them in a modern setting. So like angels and demons. Apparently, whenever people see that, they think I write religious stories, and I'm like, no. If
If you're religious, don't read this.
it's not. I mean, if you would call Lucifer on Netflix a religious show, I guess maybe. So it's the same thing.
They just see those words, angels and demons, or things of that nature, and like
I really treat it as a mythology similar to like Greek mythology or Aztec mythology. So it was a lot of fun. It's a fun series to write because it's all standalone stuff. None of them interconnect at all. So I'm able to just kind of dive right into a story, and they're short. Some of them are 5 pages, some of them are 12 pages, but each one is like I'm starting a brand new project from scratch with a new art team. And yes, I did do one story that involved Cain and Abel. So good catch.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the whole Cain and Abel concept is very interesting because it's like, did they know what murder actually was? I mean, all of it. I mean, I hate to say this, I feel like we're going to get shit for it, but yeah, it's Greek mythology, it's Roman mythology, it's Aztec mythology, it's Christian mythology. Nobody actually knows what happened, but it is a very interesting concept because for so many people, it's the first documented murder. Yeah. And what all? I mean, did Cain just go crazy and kill Abel? Like, what happened? Was there more to it?
So the story that I did for them was I did a crossover with another indie creator who writes a book called Hollow Girl. And the way this book works is she basically becomes possessed by murder victims to take revenge on their killers, and she's like a vessel for them to do that. So I use Cain and Abel, where Cain, who's immortal, is in modern day, and Abel takes possession of her to get revenge on her brother, and that's the story. So it was that I actually really like that story. It was a fun story to write, to see them kind of interact after all this time.
Nice. Do you get overly attached with any of your characters that you write? Because you always hear sometimes certain authors are like, oh, I intended for them to die, but I just became so attached to this character that they have other plans to them, things of that nature. Do you kind of find yourself the same way?
No.
You're just kind of like, guess what? You're just a
kind
character.
of a blunt answer.
If you're dying, you're dying.
No, I like that.
I do like it. I appreciate that.
You know what? I write so much that it's my mind bounces around between so many different stories all the time that it's hard for me to grow so much affection to one character that I'm just not going to kill them off.
Yeah.
A lot of times people say, and people roll their eyes at this when they say, I don't write the story kind of writes itself. I don't really have a choice in the direction of the story, which I get. You want to roll your eyes to that, but at the same time, there is some truth to that. Sometimes when you're writing a story, it just feels compelled to go in a certain direction, and you really don't have a choice to it. If you want to write it in a different direction, it just feels so bad. You're like, why am I doing this? It was supposed to go in the other way. So if a character's meant to die, they're meant to die. I don't really. I just hit the keys. I don't know what comes out.
No,
I mean, we
I
all have
honestly like that
characters we
answer. Yeah.
love. Yeah, I mean, we all have characters we love that it was enjoyable watching them die, even though we didn't want them to die. And those are the best shows, are the shows that will kill off people that you don't see coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point too, you want to not do things for shock value.
Well, when it's necessary, yeah. Like Breaking Bad's a great example. They didn't kill anybody off for shock value. They always had a reason for killing people, and you understood it, and it was all done well.
Yeah, two shows that after a time I could do without were Game of Thrones and American Horror Story. I felt
Don't
like
get me going on Game of Thrones.
they went
He's-
they just after a while people were if they became to the point where on social media people were talking about it so much. They're like, we need buzz, we need people to talk about this. So they were doing so much for just pure shock value, and it didn't make a
Yeah.
whole lot of sense story wise. And yeah, I try to avoid that.
I agree. American Horror Story, just not to get sidetracked. I used to be into it for the first few seasons, but that shock value, I feel like they spend too much time buying into their own hype that it detracts from the writing almost. And that kind of happened with Game of Thrones as well, is once they ran out of material to create the show about, they were kind of buying into their own hype and things kind of got lazy in a regard. And so that's the worst thing that you could possibly do. Like, sure, get hyped, like you're getting that recognition, but don't buy into your hype too much that detracts from the story. Just kind of like you said, in a roundabout way.
Well,
I watch every single season of American Horror Story right now just out of pure habit. Like I don't, I don't really enjoy it. I'm like,
Yeah,
okay.
I've never seen that one. That one, this has a lot of seasons now. Isn't it different every season?
It is, yes.
Yeah. And they vaguely connect a little bit.
Yeah.
The first couple seasons were really good. At this point, I'm just like, okay, another one. I might as well. I've seen the past 27 seasons. Why not? Next.
No, you're totally right. They definitely intertwined more earlier, but now it's just more of.
But see, Dexter
whatever.
was one that killed people off beautifully and then went for shock value. So it started out great, and like once they start, and I think Game of Thrones did too. They killed people off at first for value and where the story needed to take them, and then they just went for shock value. But
Yeah.
no, I mean, once you're just going for shock value, then you lose the shock value.
Well, yeah, 100%.
No, I like that you take the story where it needs to go, because then you avoid unnecessarily killing people.
No,
I was going to
you're
name
right.
somebody, but then I feel like I'm going to ruin some spoiler for some shows.
I know. I want to
Still
spoil
watching.
something too. I mean, after a certain point of time, if you're not going to watch the show, you might as well not watch it anymore.
I know, but I feel like there's
that's how
certain
I
shows
feel.
like Game of Thrones. People will still be watching that for the first time in 10, 20 years, I feel like.
Don't.
Well, and Dexter's getting revamped.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they're. You weren't a fan of how it ended, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's
Like,
exactly what I was going to say.
Oh,
Yeah.
who was?
Like
if
everybody
you can
else.
find me one person who was a fan of how that show ended, I would honestly be surprised.
I don't even
I've
think
never
the
met
writers
somebody.
were, honestly.
I've never met a single human being on this planet who was a fan of that show that was happy with how it ended.
My husband always said that it got more like it was a terrible ending, but he's like, it made it worse because it ended right at the same time Breaking Bad did, and Breaking Bad ended so beautifully
Yeah.
that it was like, wow, this is so good, and then, oh my God, Dexter, what are you doing? But they're revamping it, they're bringing it back, so I mean, hopefully this is their kind of
Did you learn
web redemption.
I don't know.
Well, I guess the
Sometimes.
writer who wrote early on in this season is coming back for this revamp, and his, I guess, original, but he said what his original I think we mentioned it early on. His original intention was to have Dexter die by lethal injection or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but
It ends with John Lithgow. That's how it kind of ends for me.
I just remember watching it and being like, so Dexter's Wolverine. He's just living in Canada in the woods and has a beard and
essentially.
What's going
I
on?
wanted him to. I mean, I was okay with that, but I wanted him to like keep doing what he was doing. I wanted him to pick up his killing lifestyle there. So that, I mean, that would have been at least some
He
sort of
probably is.
ending, but but we didn't see that. He was just kind of like sitting there all
chopping
sad.
wood. Here
And
we
that
go.
was kind of how it ended. It was like,
Tried to hook up with my
But I
sister
didn't
and
like,
killed her. and-
Hannah ended up with Harrison, and then the whole thing with Deb. And I get it after what Deb. If you're watching Dexter and you don't want to hear this, just turn it off now.
First of all, it's been
So
like 12 years. What are you doing?
I know, but still, I always feel bad ruining things because there are things I'll go back and I'll watch, and it's I feel bad. I don't want to be an asshole, but so here's your spoiler alert warning. When Deb ended up killing LaGuerta, because I hated that he dumped Deb where his victims' bodies went, but I felt like he
Just
was doing
dumped her
that
in the ocean.
because she killed an innocent, though. So to him, she actually did fit the code. So I kind of try to look for that symbolism. Like,
Giving
why
too
did
much
they do this?
credit
Was there?
for no.
I'm trying to give
You're
them the
giving
benefit
way
of the
too
doubt.
much credit.
After
Regardless,
the Lumen
anyways, yeah,
season, I didn't like Dexter. Yeah, this could be a whole episode.
you're
and a
right.
half
We
on
kind of
him.
got off track. God, yeah, don't Dexter. Game of
Tonight's
Thrones.
the night.
There's one thing like I don't that just gets me
Is
so
it
hot and
that they don't
bothered.
film in Miami and they pretend they do?
No, it's just Game of Thrones and how everything and just oh my god, that gives
All
me
right.
such a headache.
So
Anyway,
how many?
start?
What's that?
Where did this start? I don't remember.
Yes. So we wanna,
Killing characters naturally or intentionally.
yeah, we
There you go.
last homicide, the first issue's out. How many issues are you do you have
That
This
was
is
planned?
gonna be my
this is a
question.
straight two-parter.
Ooh, a straight two-parter. Heck yeah. So
Oh,
we're gonna
so we're gonna get
when
everything's
does
gonna
the
be wrapped up in
second
your
part
next
come
issue?
out?
That will be 6 or 8 months after the first one ends.
Oh, you're gonna keep us waiting for a good
Damn.
long
Yeah.
time.
Wow, we're
Kickstarter
gonna call you HBO.
Kickstarters are tricky because you have to run a campaign, which
Oh, for
is
sure.
a couple weeks long. Then you have to fulfill the campaign. You have to make sure everybody gets a book. And then in the meantime, I launch other stuff. So it's like I can't have two campaigns running at the same time.
Yeah,
Kickstarter doesn't let you do that.
for
And
sure.
so it's you have to you gotta wait. Some people
So
wait like a year and a half. So I pat myself
respect
on the
it.
back.
You know, I do respect it, especially this is something that is worth waiting for, and we would just love to push out the Kickstarter and kind of get that moving. So send it to us. We'll push it out.
Yeah, and we'll
and
bring you back on when you do the second one.
and
I,
yeah,
I appreciate that. Thanks.
you would love to come on once the second one comes out, we'd love to come back and chat about it some more and then go over the entire series just because this has been such a great time. I know we kind of got off on tangents and things of that nature, but again, this comic book was great from the art to the writing to just everything going on. It's safe to say we're both hooked, and this
Yeah.
is it's easy because we read a lot of superhero stuff. Like the world is so dominated right now by superheroes, whether it's Marvel, whether it's DC, whether it's Image Comics.
It's even Emmett, yeah.
You're just living in a superhero world, so it's always nice to go back and get involved in some stories that just are normal people. Now, I use normal loosely, of course, because we have mob bosses who are doing their thing and we have cops, but you're on the
But
ground.
those are normal people.
They
As
are. Nobody
scary
has
as it is, They are normal
superpowers.
people. They exist for real.
Yeah, nobody has superpowers. Nobody's flying into the sky, things of that nature. It's just, this is your very
That we know
classic.
of yet.
Yeah, that's the cliffhanger at the end.
The cliffhanger, nobody knows.
The aging detective is going to be like, "I'm done."
Listen, I'm out of here. I'm going back to my planet.
Right, he flies to Mars.
I solved the murder with my X-ray vision. I found out.
I read everybody's minds. I know exactly who
This is
did
breaking
it. So
news. You heard it here first, folks.
I have my theories on it, and I'm gonna go ahead and give my theory. Should I give my theories?
I
on
haven't
it?
really
I
thought
kind of do. I
theories.
kind of do. So my personal theory is that Kitty knows who killed her son and that she's in on it with a cop for some reason. Whether it's he was doing some messed up stuff. That's my theory, just because I'm thinking like really left field kind of. So my theory is that she's in on it and that there is a cop involved and it's not going to be a cop that we kind of think.
I think it's the I'm too old. for
Awkward
this shit
silence.
cop.
Yes. As Lauren
Well, because I
sitting, she's
really
like,
didn't think about an
"Ugh."
ending. When it ended, I thought like, well, where's the rest of this? It's
Well,
like we're so used
to
to
me,
that
I'm
instant
always thinking like
gratification
I
sometimes,
love
yeah.
getting theories. I love creating my own kind of, what's going to happen. I like thinking of that. So that's kind of where my head's at. You don't have to give your theories, things of that nature. That's just what I'm thinking.
Who, me or
I guess
him?
you.
Because I don't think
I don't
he
want
should
to.
give his
He's not going to
theories.
spoil it, and I wouldn't want him to because I'm very excited when the second part comes out to read it, just to see how far off I was, like WandaVision, how far off we were.
Oh my
'cause
god, we
we
were.
were
If you go back and
not
listen to our
right
WandaVision
whatsoever.
predictions, Not a
And
thing. I will say I do still think that I did have a theory that they cast Evan Peters to fuck with us, and I'm standing by
well,
that
yeah,
theory.
the director pretty much was like, I like the Iron Man 3 spin, and that's why I chose him. So
Ugh,
don't
the
get me started on that
Mandarin.
either. That's kind of where I'm at. Frank, is there anything that you would like for us to know? Anything that we didn't touch upon?
Where can we find you?
Where
Get
can
the
we
phone.
find you? Plug yourself, talk yourself up. This is it.
Sure. I'm very easy. I'm Frank the Writer. So franktherewriter.com is my website. I got a whole bunch of free comics and stories on there if you want to sample what I got. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, same thing, at Frank the Writer. And Last Homicide launches April 6th. It's going to be on there for 3 weeks. And if you even glance anywhere on my social media, you'll see kind of links and me pushing it along. So
Yeah.
if you're into some people don't like crime noir detective stories, but if you like it a little bit, give it a look.
Yeah, we're gonna push it out, and I'll tell you right now, the links will be up. This comic, when you're listening, has come out 2 days ago, and it's a phenomenal comic. Make sure you check it out. Seriously, it's a nice kind of breath of fresh air, I like to say, in the world of superheroes, like I was saying. So, really appreciate you coming out and talking with us. One last question: was Frank the Writer an homage to Frank the Tank from Old School?
Uh, might be. You know what? It's funny you say that because my college yearbook, my quote in it was that old school quote when he says, "Frank the Tank is gone, baby. He's never coming back." So it might have been on my mind. Definitely might have been on my mind.
It is. It's easy to remember. Frank the Writer. That's all you know. It's simple. It sticks with you, but simple is good. And so we
Well,
really, again, sorry.
funny story, right, real quick. Frank the Writer was taken on Facebook. I had it on Instagram. I had it Twitter. I had the website. I'm like, I need it on Facebook, and it was some guy had it, and somebody
Never
told me a
used
little
it.
somebody told me a little Facebook trick in that if somebody has a page and they don't post on it for a long period of time, you'll contact Facebook and they'll yank it, and they gave it to me. So
Hell
that's
yeah.
how I
I
got it.
mean, look, if you're gonna have a
Nice.
name and you don't use it, it's true. In this case, if you don't
If you
use
don't
it, you
use
do
it,
lose it.
you lose
In this
it.
case.
There you go.
That's a little Facebook hack. If you want a specific username on Facebook and somebody has it but they're not using it, um, Facebook looks out for their own, I guess. And so the one
Absolutely. The one
You
time
know, it's
Facebook actually does something good.
yeah.
So really, really appreciate you coming on again. You can find our episodes weekly. This episode has been a lot of fun to record. I just want to say shout out to Ian, Lauren's friend, whom I have not met yet, for sending this delicious beer. It was amazing. I got tasted just like coconut. Tastes just like coconut. I don't like coconut normally. So Sideward Brewing, thank you. Everybody, if you're looking for us, you know where to find us. And Lauren, do you have any parting shots before we depart?
I'm about done with your homebrew, and it was fantastic.
Yes, I
And
can't wait to
yes,
brew
I
mine.
absolutely love this comic. You know, like Matt said, I love all the superhero comics, but it is fun to mix it up. And I love mafia stuff, and I love detective stuff. And I don't like the real, true forensic files. I like to be in fake murder. So I really like this, and I look forward to finding out whose shell casing that was. So I'm very
Yes.
excited. So, and
Same.
maybe it'll come out around Halloween, a little bit after. We'll see. But I look forward to it.
And you guys will probably see us on our socials. I'm going to be picking up a couple of the books that you have written because I love kind of that genre that you write. So I'm going to pick up a couple, and so be on the lookout for that. And thanks again for joining us. And
Yeah, the Kickstarter's new feature has add-ons. So I have a whole bunch of my back catalog on there. So if you hear something we're talking about that you like and you want to pick up Last Homicide, you can add on to your pledge, and I'll send them over to you.
awesome. Be on the
Nice.
lookout for that. We are going to be pushing the Kickstarter Wicked Had, as I like to say, because I am from Boston myself. So it'll be out everywhere you can find it. And thank you everyone for listening. Cheers.
Cheers.
Adios.
This has been a Hops News production. You can find Hops News on all your favorite podcasts and social media platforms at Hops News. Cheers.